Here's tonight's moderator, Jim Rosenfield.
And good evening. Welcome to all of you. We are 1 week away now from an election day like no other, and of course the stakes are huge. We are honored to be on the campus of Rowan University tonight, and we want to thank our partners who have made all of this possible, from the Philadelphia Inquirer, Philly.com, as well as Telemundo. And the candidates, they are here. Democrat Cory Booker, mayor of Newark, New Jersey, and the Republican Steve Lonegan, former mayor of Bogota. I'll be asking them the questions tonight, along with our panelists, who include David Ushery of News 4 New York and Jonathan Tamari from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Now, each candidate will get a minute to respond to these questions. We'll give them a 15-second bell to let them know they're about to run out of time, per agreement with the campaigns. Some of those questions have come from you, the viewers, and we really appreciate your help. Your work is not quite done, though, because we want to encourage you all to live tweet about tonight's debate using a hashtag NJSEN, NJSEN. We're going to be busy up here, so we're not going to be tweeting, gentlemen, right? But we encourage you to tweet about the debate. So let's get right to the first question. We had a coin toss, and randomly, the first question will be going to you, Mr. Lonegan. As you know, we are now in the 9th day of a government shutdown with no agreement in sight, as far as we can tell. 9 days. So I'd like you to give a grade to the members of Congress you'd like to be joining, an A to F grade. Well, grade them on their work so far. And then, without going negative, I want you to try to stay positive and not talk about what the opposing party has done wrong, but give us a concrete example of what you would do to try to break this impasse.
Well, John, thank you. I want to thank Rowan University, the audience, John and David, as well as my opponent, Mayor Booker, for being here today. I think the impasse in Washington, D.C. is unfortunate. I would like to see government opened. However, I think it is absolutely essential that we postpone the implementation of the Obama health care plan for 1 year.
What would your grade be first?
My grade for the two sides would be a big F for the president, who refuses to compromise with the Republicans, and they have offered many compromises in the last week and continue to offer to compromise.
The members of Congress.
My grade for the members of Congress would be actually a B, because I think they could do a better job in communicating to the American public. For example, the fact that under the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, Section 4, they simply cannot default on that debt. And that is a false...
Time.
Thank you.
You have 15 more seconds.
Oh. And that is actually a false threat that threatens the economy and the stock markets today, and it's something I think is unacceptable.
Mr. Booker, your grade, and then how you would try to break this impasse.
Sure. So the grade has got to be an F. We send people to Washington to work together to solve our problems. And right now, we have a government in shutdown, really being shut down because of Tea Party extremists in Washington that are stopping our government. Now, my opponent is the leader of the Tea Party here in New Jersey. And he is somebody that has said, I support the shutdown. I believe we need to send people to Washington. They're going to bring people together to work together. And this is a chance for New Jersey to send a message. The first election during this shutdown, we can send a message directly to Washington. Do we want to send more Tea Party people down there who are so obsessed with Obamacare that they want to shut down the entire government to stop the expansion of health care to more people in America?
How would you break this impasse, though, in a positive way?
Well, one, all of us have to decide. What is New Jersey going to do about it? Send more Tea Party people to Washington that would make what's going wrong in Washington worse? Or send people down there like I have, who have a record in Newark, New Jersey, regardless of party, bringing people together to make a difference for our state?
30-second response.
Go ahead, Mr.
Mayor, I knew that your consultants, your strategists, and your acting coaches would tell you to use the word Tea Party as much as possible. So I have thousands of people across the United States of America who are going to donate $10 to this campaign every time you say Tea Party. So please keep it up so you can now offset the $1 million that you're getting from Michael Bloomberg to advance that left-wing liberal agenda. I'm not the head of the Tea Party. I'm sorry.
Just letting you know you have 15 seconds when we give you that
you're right.
signal.
I want to say that I was not the head of the Tea Party. I headed up an organization called Americans for Prosperity that advocates for limited government, lower taxes, and liberty. If there was an organization called Politicians for Their Own Prosperity, you'd be a charter member.
All right, let's move on.
Do I get a 30-second rebuttal?
We're going to move on because we want to cover as many topics as we can.
Okay, sure.
All right, if you're all right with that, let's do that, because the big sticking point on this shutdown, of course, is the Affordable Care Act.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, you have said you support the act, but you have said there are problems with it. We have not heard what you think those problems are specifically. Can you name any issues that need to be resolved when it comes to the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare.
Absolutely. But sure, let's just understand that this is another clear distinction between me and my opponent. My opponent is not only against the Affordable Care Act, but he said he would not have even voted for Medicare. He said, and I quote, that he would be as callous and uncaring as you can imagine. He would hate to see you get cancer, but if he does, that's your problem, not mine. I believe people go to Washington to make issues of cancer, issues of health care, all of our problems and work to deal with them. So Obamacare has good aspects. It's actually, right now, helped families with children with pre-existing conditions actually not be at the whim of insurance companies and be able to be denied coverage, but help them get them. It helped young people like are in this audience today to stay on their parents' insurance longer. The challenges with Obamacare right now are just in the implementation. We have to make sure it's implemented in a way that works for everyone. And on top of that, we've got to make sure that when we look at Obamacare, we're also doing more to control the incredible growth of healthcare costs in our country. So this is very clear. I believe that we should have healthcare. The gentleman to my left believes that we should not have government-provided healthcare in any way whatsoever.
Mr. Lonegan?
84-year-old Angelina Frattini of Ocean County told me at a public meeting that she's going to lose her doctor because of Obamacare. That he's going to drop out of the system and he won't take on Medicare patients. 67-year-old Diane Bart, a retired nurse, has been told that she's going to lose her health care coverage because of Obamacare. Obamacare is bringing chaos into the marketplace. It threatens the health care of millions of Americans. 800,000 New Jerseyans in the last 2 weeks have received letters that are being thrown off their health insurance. The system is simply not ready to be implemented. All we're asking, and it's very reasonable, is that it be postponed for 1 year so all these problems and issues can be addressed, and in return, fund government. Corporations across America, major corporate allies of President Obama, have gotten special carve-outs, and others are getting special exemptions. I'm only asking that the individuals sitting in this audience get the same cooperation as these major corporations have.
All right, let's go now to David Ushery.
Do I have a 30-second rebuttal, sir?
Let's move to David Ushery, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Question on image.
Jim, thank you, and Mr. Booker, Mr. Lonegan, good evening to you both. Mr. Booker, you've heard it time and time again now. Your opponent says that you're more concerned about what happens in Hollywood versus New Jersey. In recent days of the campaign, even some of your supporters have expressed concern that there's unfinished business in Newark. So how can you assure voters of the Garden State that you are interested in serving them and not your own ambition?
Well, I appreciate that. First and foremost, the city of Newark, as the Star Ledger just said, has made undeniable progress. We're going through our biggest economic development boom in the last 50 years. Our first new office towers are being built in decades. Our first new hotels are being built in 40 years. Companies are moving their headquarters to Newark, from Panasonic moving its North American headquarters to Newark, to even companies like Manischewitz and Audible.com. In addition to this, crime is down, 27% reduction in shootings, and on top of all of this, we actually have shrunk the size of our government, spending less money than when I came in, and last year gave people a $1,000 tax break. So we're making tremendous progress in the city of Newark, but the challenge is we still do have work to do. But this is why we need help from Washington. There are clear things that I support in Washington to help empower New Jersey cities that my opponent does. For one is violent crime. I believe, like the overwhelming majority of New Jerseyans, even gun owners, that we should end secondary markets not doing background checks on gun legislation. My opponent actually is supported by the NRA, has received money from the gun lobby, and is against sensible background checks that would make our cities safer.
Mr. Lonegan, you want to respond?
My opponent talked about economic growth in Newark, where $443 million in the last 7 years for the New Jersey Transit Hub subsidy programs have been poured into that city. Over $100 million for one company to move a block or two. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of our tax dollars poured into corporate subsidies for the folks that he gets to meet when he's out partying in Hollywood and San Francisco and making those sort of Hollywood deals. And at the same time as all this massive amounts of our money from suburban and rural taxpayers is being poured into Newark, so he can hand it out to his corporate allies, his corporate friends, those funding his campaign today, unemployment has gone from 8 to 14%. Unemployment raising from 8 to 14% is not progress. That's a setback for the working people of Newark, New Jersey.
Time. You want to respond?
Sure, I'd like to respond. You know, it's insulting that Steve says this, not to me, but to all the people that have come together in Newark, New Jersey to work on our issues. Right now, Newark is 3% of the state's population, but 1/3 of all the development, commercial multifamily, in the entire state is going on in Newark. Again, the ledger says that that is undeniable. But I'll tell you what's even more. Steve's vision of cities is negative. He literally has said, with Camden, the solution should be to level the whole city. We don't need United States senators who are going to talk down to the cities. We need a United States senator that's going to lift up our entire state, roll up their sleeves, and work together with people to make a difference.
Mr. Lonegan, Governor Christie has heavily promoted the recovery on the Jersey Shore in the wake of Superstorm Sandy. But you said you would have opposed the federal relief bill to Sandy victims. Is it not the role of the federal government through FEMA to direct aid to those who have become victims of a natural disaster?
The role of federal government to direct money to the victims of natural disaster is perfectly fine. What I objected to with Sandy is it was done in a rush. There were not proper controls put in place to ensure that that money went to the real victims of Hurricane Sandy. We're seeing that today. There's numerous reports of homeowners along the Jersey Shore that have been waiting all of this time. And the other thing I objected to is the fact that the money for Sandy came out of nowhere. It was simply printed out of thin air by the Federal Reserve Bank. There were no corresponding cuts in any other part of the federal budget. I'd like to see us take away foreign aid from countries that burn our flag and would like to see us killed for building bridges and roads and bring it to New Jersey. So I asked for corresponding spending cuts, reasonable controls in how the money would be used that would go to victims and not just simply become a major spending spree. And I'm sure several hundred million of that money will go into Newark, New Jersey, to continue to subsidize Cory Booker's failed agenda in that city.
Mr. Booker?
Yes.
On Sandy aid.
Well, please listen to what he's saying. He literally would be a senator from New Jersey that when people were in urgent, immediate need from Superstorm Sandy, he'd say, wait, don't give our families money. Don't give our businesses money. Let me work out these larger issues first. That is absolutely unacceptable. To say that I wouldn't accept Sandy aid, actually, that's exactly what the Tea Party has been doing. Now, he says, I'm not a Tea Party. If this is a drinking game, I'm sure people at home are drinking. He said Tea Party. But think about this. Look at who he has coming in. And he talks about Hollywood folks. Look who he has. He has 3 Tea Party people coming in. Sarah Palin endorsing him. 3 people. Rand Paul endorsing him. And who's that third person? Oh, yeah, Rick Perry. Rick Perry endorsing him. And so this is the Tea Party that he would join down in Washington, that is shut down politics. Don't give Sandy aid, cut the minimum wage, make abortion illegal in the state of New Jersey, even in rape and incest. This is the extreme Tea Party agenda of which he's been running in the state of New Jersey.
I wanted to ask a follow-up to you because there was a published report this week that said that you did go to the then Democratic governor of New Jersey, Governor Corzine, to ask for state aid for your town, for Bogota.
Absolutely.
So that's okay.
Oh, absolutely. Listen, the taxpayers in the suburbs and rural areas of this state have been ripped off now for 30 years. They gave us a sales tax. They said that was going to cut property taxes. Then they passed an income tax, and that was going to cut property taxes. All that income tax and sales tax money gets poured into the big black hole of Newark. The biggest portion of our income tax dollars goes to Newark, New Jersey. When a mayor of a small town fights to get that money back, which we were told we were going to have for property tax relief, that is my job. And every mayor, every councilman in the state of New Jersey knows that.
May I respond, please?
Go ahead.
Please understand this. He was a mayor of a city that had financial stability. And then when he ran the budget into a ditch and had no way of balancing his budget, he ran to John Corzine for what was called extraordinary aid, a bailout for his city, small little town of Bogota. Now, what I did is I inherited a budget nightmare, $700 million budget, $118 million budget deficit. We not only balanced our budget, cleaned up our books, shrunk the size of our government, but we gave tax breaks to $1,000 to each people. One mayor who ran his city into a ditch had to ask for a bailout, another one that cleaned up the finances.
All right, let's get out of this ditch and let's move to Jonathan with a viewer question.
Mr. Booker, Dan from Marlton raises a question about crime in Newark. Early in your tenure, the number of murders in Newark fell dramatically, but they've ticked steadily upwards every year since 2008. Dan writes this question. What makes you believe you should be elected to higher office if you can't fix Newark's crime problem?
I appreciate the question. And again, let's just talk facts. Right now, uniform crime statistics show that shootings in Newark, since I've been elected from 2006, are down 27%. Murders are down over 15%. We've not only done that, but we've done it with less resources than my predecessor. In fact, we have a third less police officers. We brought people together to drive down crime. Republicans and Democrats, even the Conservative Manhattan Institute, rolled up their sleeves and joined with us to help on prisoner reentry programs to help people who come out of prison not go right back. We were creative, we were innovative, doing more with less. My opponent's solution to big cities, again, is let's level Camden. He talks down to Newark. We need a senator going down to Washington that will do the things to lift up our entire state, to understand that we're one state with one destiny. And critical federal issues that are not solved yet, like background checks in these secondary markets, which my opponent opposes. He's getting support from the NRA, who's dropping money into his campaign. We believe that there should be background checks, rational federal legislation to empower safety, not just in Newark, but all over our state.
Mr. Booker, to follow up on these statistics, you cite shootings, which is not a statistic that's kept by the state police or by the FBI. When you look at murders, they were 67 in 2008 and 95 last year. Is that progress on crime?
So again, and you say 2008, when we led the nation, under my mayoralty, we led the nation in dropping down shootings and murders in our city. And so, yes, we ticked back up, but nowhere near where the city I inherited. We are down more than 15% in murders. And again, the guns pouring into the streets of the city of Newark do not come from New Jersey. They come from other states that have lax gun laws, don't do background checks, and where we allow federal law to allow that to happen. This is what the gun lobby and the NRA, why they're supporting the Tea Party leader here in New Jersey. Ching, ching. We need to make sure that we get real federal legislation to stop background checks.
Mr. Lonegan?
You know, Mayor Booker talked about my $100,000 in state aid my last year. That's less than 1/6 of the money he got back from Trenk de Pasquale as a payoff for the millions of dollars in contracts he sent over his former law partners. As the mayor of Bogota, crime dropped 30% while I was in office because I put more police on the streets. But under Cory Booker, back a month ago, 14-year-old Allie Henderson was shot to death in the streets of Newark. Well, he was on the Jimmy Fallon show telling people what a great job he was doing in Newark. That's not a great job. 10 people in a row, one a day for 10 days, while my opponent was running around Hollywood and San Francisco promoting himself.
All right, you mentioned guns. Mayor Booker, Jonathan, you have a question on that.
Yes, for Mr. Lonegan. Public opinion polls show broad support for expanding background checks for gun purchases. Would you support a law that closed the loophole at gun shows?
I support national instant checks, which is actually supported by the NRA. No gun dealers or gun enthusiasts want criminals to buy guns like they can do on the streets of Newark. I don't believe any of the crimes conformed in Newark were committed by legal gun owners. In fact, I believe in the last debate, the mayor admitted that it's not legal gun owners, people who buy guns legally, that commit crimes. It's criminals. And criminals don't pay attention to all these laws. They don't pay attention to all these rules.
But Mr. Lonegan, the NICS system, that's what's in place right now. Are you saying you would not support any expansion of that?
Well, the problem with what you're talking about, these national background checks, mean that if I wanted to give a firearm to my daughter, 29-year-old girl, works late at night, she's walking across a parking lot, unfortunately she can't defend herself under New Jersey law. But when she's home alone and wants to defend herself, if I wanted to give her a right to do that, I wouldn't be able to do it without having a national background check. That's an intrusion into our privacy. That's not a gun control protection.
What about at gun shows where it's not family?
Well, New Jersey doesn't have gun shows. So we don't sell guns at gun shows in New Jersey. So.
But you would be making decisions on national legislation in the Senate.
Yeah, I will not support any expansion of invasion of our Second Amendment rights in the United States. I will be standing up for our Second Amendment rights boldly.
Mr. Booker?
Thank you very much. Okay, so
if we'd ask you not to applaud, it would help us move things along. Thank you.
So please understand what he just said. He said he is against having background checks done at gun shows, which means now in the United States of America, after what happened in Kenya, people in automatic weapons doing a military-style attack, terrorism, people in Mumbai, terrorism, it basically means that if you are on the terrorist no-fly list in the United States, you can get on a plane in Newark Airport. You can't get on a plane in Newark Airport, but you can drive to a gun show, fill up trunkload full of weapons, and drive them back into cities in New Jersey and use those. 90% of American people, the majority of New Jerseyans, believe in simple background checks at gun shows to stop these weapons that are coming into our city. And we know that they're coming from gun shows because we stop these gun runners and find out where they got their guns for. This is common sense. It's common sense, and we should be doing it. 84% of gun owners in America agree with this. You are way on the extreme on this issue.
All right, let's move on to another.
May I address that, please?
Let's move on to another hot-button issue, which is same-sex marriage. A judge recently legalized it in New Jersey, as you know. We know that, Mr. Lonegan, you've taken issue with that. You've said that that should be left to people to decide. But a recent poll found more than half of New Jerseyans, in fact, support same-sex marriage. So we want to ask you, what rights do you believe same-sex couples should have?
First of all, it's not the role of the judiciary or one judge to make law. That's up to the legislature and the people of this state to decide.
Well, the legislature did act on it.
The legislature acted, the governor vetoed it, and the legislature could not override that veto. While I support marriage between a man and a woman, it is a sacred institution. Marriage between a man and a woman is the greatest institution ever devised by the mind of man to raise a child, and that's what this is about. It's about children. And I'm going to support traditional marriage. However, I do believe in liberty and the rights of adults to live their lives the way they choose. Consequently, I do not want other groups forcing their new value system down the throats of my Catholic Church, evangelical church, Protestant churches, and overriding our institutional religious beliefs.
So,
go ahead, Mr.
It's a fundamental ideal in America, a separation of church and state. We must respect churches and mosques and institutions. But another fundamental balance to that is this idea that we're all equal under the law, that our government treats all citizens, regardless of backgrounds or belief, equally. I would not be standing here right now if it was left to legislatures to say that we're going to treat all people, regardless of their background or color of their skin, equally. This is a fundamental principle in American law, equality under the law. And the ability to have the same treatment by our government if you love someone, to me, is something that it's good that the majority of New Jerseyans believe in that. And this is the problem. He says he supports liberty, but you can't be free to marry who you want. He says he supports liberty, but he wants politicians getting between a woman and her doctor about making their own health care decisions. And that's why he's even against, not the liberty of women, but he's against women having the right to choose what they do with their own bodies, even if they're victims of rape or incest. This, again, is the extreme Tea Party views of my opponent, not the mainstream in New Jersey.
Can I go back to one thing that you mentioned when it came to the rights of same-sex couples? You said this is about the children. So are you saying same-sex couples should not be allowed to have children?
That would be a biological phenomenon.
There is adoption.
Adoption. Well,
there is artificial insemination.
I understand.
Please, no applause.
I think the decision should, again, be made by the legislature and by the people of New Jersey.
But I'm asking you what you believe. Should same-sex couples be allowed to adopt children or use a surrogate? They shouldn't have that right.
I have a question about how healthy that will be in the long run for those children, and I have mixed feelings about that. I will admit that I have mixed feelings about that.
Okay, thank you. Let's move to David with a question on jobs.
All right, thank you, Jim. Mr. Booker, we want you to talk about something you've already referenced here in the debate, and that is how you made development and urban renewal a high priority for you in Newark. But the unemployment rate in Newark is at about 14%, nearly double the New Jersey average of 8%. Should voters question whether you can handle or be effective as a senator if you couldn't get a hold on that unemployment rate in Newark?
Yeah, again, because Newark, New Jersey had such a wave of development, the percentage change, remember, unemployment rates went up all across the state. Our percentage change was a lot less than the state of New Jersey as a whole. And please understand, as I said before, Newark right now is having such a boom in development that we represent 1/3 of all the development, commercial and multifamily, looking at square footage in the entire state. Now, some people, like my opponent, might say that's not enough. You should have had half of all New Jersey's development. But we say simply we're continuing to do things. In fact, tomorrow, we're going to announce that Whole Foods is moving a major 29,000 square foot store into the middle of Newark. It's yet another sign that people are coming, developers, businesses. In fact, our population is increasing for the first time in 60 years. It's why the Star-Ledger said that the city of Newark's progress is unmistakable. In fact, the most common bird that you see in Newark right now is the crane, because there's so many cranes putting up steel with all the new buildings.
Well, let me just follow up really quickly, Mr. Booker. Some have complained that the tax abatements that may have gone to some of those corporations came at the expense of property owners who had to pay a lot higher property tax.
Well, that's actually not true at all. What we have right now, the property tax is based on each individual town's assessment. When Governor Christie and I, just week before last, stood together to announce a $130 million, cut the ribbon on a $130 million project, and the governor of the state, the Republican governor, the Democratic mayor stood together to announce this development, it was a clear sign that not only were 500 construction jobs being created and hundreds of permanent jobs, but that we were doing it together to increase the tax base of our entire state. Because companies and businesses that were not in New Jersey before are now coming to our biggest city, harkening back to the days that Newark was the economic driver for our entire state.
Mr. Lonegan?
The only birds in Newark are the vultures. The political hacks that are picking away at the carcasses of the taxpayers of that city, who are watching their real property taxes, the real taxpayers, the small businesses that you are destroying, while you hand out hundreds of millions of dollars in corporate handouts, corporate subsidies to those that are politically connected to you, that you met while you're out in Hollywood or going around California. Unemployment is at 14%, almost double the national average. That is a failure in anybody's book, and all you need to do is go into any small business and they'll tell you how they're being crushed by high taxes, overregulation, runaway crime, rampant high school dropout rates. I mean, it's a complete mess.
Let's move on to foreign affairs for a moment. You both said it's not America's role to be a police force around the world. This past weekend, as you know, Navy SEALs tried to capture leaders of the militant group responsible for the attack, the massacre at the mall in Kenya that left at least 67 people dead. There were no Americans among the dead, as far as we know. Do you support this kind of deployment of U.S. military forces? We'll start with you, Mr. Lonegan.
No, I do not support this deployment of U.S. military forces at every intervention. As my opponent has put on his website, he supports all these small interventions. We do not need to be involved in every small intervention. I'll remind you that tomorrow, I believe, the bodies of 5 U.S. military men, 4 soldiers, and a Marine will be returned from Afghanistan. And the President is refusing to fund the death benefits for those soldiers. The President is refusing to pay for the families of those soldiers to go to the airport to meet with the bodies of these men who died unnecessarily in a war that this President said he was going to end, and has now gone on longer than it did under George Bush. We need to put an end to the death of our American young people in these unnecessary interventions.
Okay. I don't know if my opponent is running against me or running against Barack Obama.
Both.
But the reality...
Because you're one and the same.
The reality is the reason why those benefits aren't there for these folks coming home, don't you understand? It's because a fringe group of Tea Party people shut down our government. And this is not the president's fault. It's people on, not even Republicans' fault. It's the Tea Party people like Ted Cruz, who you say are heroes to America. So please understand, if you want more shutdown politics, as the Asbury Park says, if you send Steve Lonegan down to Washington, it's like pouring gasoline on a fire. If you want more of what's making Washington go wrong, Steve Lonegan's your guy. If you want to end shutdown politics, end the extremism, and do the things that our government should do, supporting veterans coming home, children here in New Jersey now suffering with the risk of losing their Head Start dollars. This is a problem we have. We send people to Washington to work together, to do the residents' work
together.
And as opposed to somebody who's going down there and supporting a shutdown and will look to extend it.
Work together unless you want to attack anybody in the world who says that anything, speak out, speak their mind, stand up for American liberty, anybody who says they're part of something called the Tea Party. Anybody that doesn't agree with you, you will work against. This is the same president who shut down the World War II memorial to those great World War II veterans who defended this country, but opened up the mall to an illegal immigration rally.
But are members of your party in any way responsible for this impasse which has led to this situation?
Members of my party, the Republican Party, have introduced a series of bills to provide funding for all of these issues. Harry Reid and Barack Obama have refused to negotiate because they want to jam Obamacare down our throats at any expense. And my opponent in this race, Mr. Booker, he's only the Hollywood stand-in for Barack Obama in this ballot. This election in New Jersey is a referendum on Obamacare, the NSA, the IRS abuse of power, the intrusion into our children's education. It's the destruction of our liberty. That's what's on the ballot. My opponent is just the Hollywood stand-in for Barack Obama.
May I say one thing in response?
Go ahead. That was a long list, so we're going to give you a few minutes.
Of course you are.
Listen to my opponent's rhetoric. Listen to my opponent's rhetoric and listen to his positions. It seems like he's doing more to try to run and replace Rush Limbaugh than Frank Lautenberg. The reality is that's the kind of rhetoric that's going to drive further gridlock and further divisiveness. We need to have leaders like myself who doesn't say I won't work with anybody. Please understand, Governor Christie and I have a lot of disagreements, from our sports teams to the fact that he's losing weight and I'm gaining weight. The reality is he and I have worked together as partners on education, worked together as partners as economic development. The education and economic development policies that he bashes of mine come from a Republican-Democratic partnership to turn Newark around, and every reporter, every press is showing the progress of Newark, and tomorrow I'm looking forward to another few hundred jobs to our city.
All right.
You know,
Mr. Lonegan, let's move to another issue.
I need to address this, because
you've really
given the edge to my opponent throughout the whole debate. So
what's on your mind? What's on your mind?
You know, my opponent has mentioned Chris Christie a number of times in this debate and the last debate, over and over again. Although Governor Christie and I have the same position on abortion, same position on marriage, he continues to hold up Governor Christie as if he's being endorsed by Governor Christie. He never mentions his running mate, Barbara Bono. You got to wonder whose side he's on. Who does he support?
I don't
How does Barbara Bono feel about being thrown into the bus?
I don't understand. I'm not running with a running mate. I'm running for the United States Senate, not for governor.
She's at the top of your ticket.
And no.
No applause,
Sir,
please.
there's two different. Please understand that election's in November. Ours is next Wednesday. And so I'm running as Cory Booker, a guy who's brought people together left and right to work together. All you can do is condemn every single Democrat that comes up. You're condemning them.
I respect
and that's the kind of Tea Party approach in Washington. Condemn the other side.
All right, let's move
I've worked together with them.
Mayor, I respect Barbara Bono, and she deserves more respect from you.
All right, let's move on to David with a question on education.
All right, thank you, Jim. Education, of course, an issue that cuts through the Garden State. Now, the verdict on charter schools nationwide is somewhat spotty, sometimes better than public schools, sometimes the same, sometimes worse. You both support charters, but in light of this evidence, how can you be so supportive? And I guess we'll start with you, Mr. Booker.
Sure. First of all, public education is the bedrock of our state. We need to do everything we can to continue to make New Jersey's public education the best in America. And in Newark, even though I have no formal authority over education whatsoever, it's under Governor Christie's state control, I leaned in and partnered with Republicans to do things. Now, Newark, New Jersey has one of the highest performing charter school sectors in the country because we brought together philanthropists from all over the country. This traveling thing I'm doing is bringing back resources to our city to improve our charter sector. Now, my opponent and I we may both support charter schools, but we have very different views on public education. My opponent actually says that he would get rid of the entire federal Department of Education. Now, what would that mean for New Jersey? That would mean that we would lose out on resources for everything from kids with autism to disadvantaged kids. It would also mean that something he doesn't support is actually making college more affordable for students. The students here right now, he's against Pell Grants, the GI Bill, and other things that make college in New Jersey more affordable. I support public education from our colleges to K through 12. My opponent would take money away from public schools and hurt the education of the state.
Mr. Lonegan?
You know, it's a known fact that New Jersey gets back only pennies on the dollar that we send to Washington, D.C. For every dollar we send to the Federal Department of Education, maybe we get back 40 cents. That's not a real good deal. You don't have to be a mathematician to figure that out. New Jersey would be better off without the Federal Department of Education set up under Jimmy Carter. We had a much better education before then in this state. But in Newark, one of the most expensive school districts in the United States of America, where per student spending is almost double that in suburban communities like Pagoda from one end of the state to the other, he has a high school dropout rate of over 50%. This mayor has failed a generation of school students for 7 years in a row. Thousands of children who are now going to become part of poverty and crime without a high school degree. And yet we, the taxpayers of New Jersey, have poured billions of dollars into his failed public education system. No, the best education is done by a parent, a child, and a teacher, not by the Federal Department of Education, and your city proves that.
All right, let's move to Jonathan with a question on the debt ceiling.
I just want to talk about an issue that's going on right now, being debated at this moment, because whoever wins this race is going to arrive in Washington just as the federal government hits its borrowing limit. Will you, starting with Mr. Booker, will you vote for a bill that raises the debt ceiling and prevents a default?
This is what we're sending people to Washington to do, to work together to get things done. Right now in Washington, unfortunately, we see this right now with people, including my opponent, who are saying we need to not raise the debt ceiling. They have a no compromise attitude. In fact, my opponent said he has no reason to compromise. I love this when you said that working together is nonsense. In fact, you said Winnie the Pooh nonsense. I don't know if that's more insulting that you're insulting working together or insulting poor Winnie the Pooh, but the reality is we need people that will raise the debt ceiling and not play this shutdown politics that plays with the full faith and credit of the United States of America. This kind of brinksmanship has to stop in Washington. It hurts our economy. It shrinks jobs. We need people that are going to go down to Washington, not be firebrands, flamethrowers, but that are going to be bridge builders and find ways to make reasonable compromise between the parties. So yes, I support compromise. Yes, I support working together. It's what I've done in Newark and what I will do down in Washington and try to damp down the Tea Party extremism that refuses to compromise.
Same question to you,
As
Mr.
the
Lonegan.
mayor of Pagoda, I always had a Democrat-Republican council, very 2-4, 4-2, sometimes 3-3. So he's always had to work with the opposite party. Unlike my opponent, who's always had an all-Democrat council and managed to have one of his council meetings erupt into a pure riot where the police were brought in and because of his actions. But I would support raising the debt ceiling with corresponding spending cuts. We need to start cutting the size of government. It is simply too big, too intrusive, and Mayor Booker wants to make it even bigger. I want to see a limited government. We need to cut spending. We are spending too much. We're going to bankrupt this country. We are mortgaging our children's future. We are headed towards economic collapse if we don't start cutting spending. And Mayor Booker does not know how to do that.
Mr. Lonegan, the President, Senate Democrats have said they would not negotiate over the debt ceiling.
Right.
So if they do not negotiate, would you then vote against raising the debt ceiling despite the warnings of the consequences?
The warnings of the consequences are pretty clearly defined in the United States Constitution, although under this administration that doesn't seem to carry much weight. The 14th Amendment, Section 4, clearly says that you cannot default on the debt. So I don't know about you, but I'm still paying all my taxes. So all that revenue is still pouring into the federal government, so they can pay their debt. But when the President and his administration says, we will not negotiate, that is not working together. That's a very clear message. It's we will not negotiate. We will not compromise. You will either do our way or no way, and sometimes it's time to stand and fight. And I'm proud that Republicans are finally standing up to this tyrant.
Wanted to ask you, Mr. Lonegan, you talk about deep cuts to the size of government. We've talked about the Department of Education. Which agencies would you cut out specifically, if any?
All right, look, let's not talk in this kind of weird, broad field. One U.S. senator is not going to go cut entire agencies.
But which agencies do you believe are unnecessary?
We can cut the Federal Department of Education significantly. That's probably the biggest one. We can make cuts to the Department of Commerce, the Department of Energy. These are intrusive regulatory agencies. We need to cut regulations on small businesses. The Environmental Protection Agency is crushing businesses across the state, including in Newark, in every single community. We need to roll back these regulations. I propose sunsetting these regulatory bodies on a regular basis and re-examining the damage they're doing to America's competitive in the rest of the world. So there's a lot that can be done in a $3.5 trillion budget on the national level. It's time government started living within its means, the way we as Americans have to do every day.
Time.
I just want to remind folks that as mayor of the city of Newark, we shrunk our government dramatically. We actually are spending less money today than we were spending way back in 2006. So I agree that we need to make sure government lives within its means. But what the Tea Party extremists in Washington and my opponent really believe is very simple. They want to get rid of regulation, but that's code words for pulling back government from doing the things that you and I both rely on our families. He wants to get rid of Medicare. He says Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. We should privatize it and end it. And when he talks about things like the EPA, that means giving oil and gas companies free rein in doing what they want to do. Knowing that I have a Passaic River running through my city in multiple towns in New Jersey, seeing the kind of pollution and contaminants that won't even allow people to go in there and swim and ruin industries like clamming and others, trust me, we need to make sure there's protections here in South Jersey. The Delaware River, if we have the pullback of the EPA, let fracking go on, like many of the frackers want to do, it could pollute our waters. So I believe in shrinking government responsibly and not pulling back the kind of protections that protect our food, our water, our air, and our safety.
You sighed. I thought you wanted to respond. So
well, you know, look,
I
think Mayor Booker's vision of Newark is about as real as T-bone. You know, you may not be able to swim in that river, but it's probably, I think, because of all the bodies floating around from shooting victims in your city.
Oh, my God.
You know, the fact is...
Oh, my God.
Yeah, oh, my God, oh, my God. You use these words like Tea Party, extremist, extreme. I tell you, your coaches have done a really good job. If you raise a family, build a small business, run a small town, stand up for this country, stand up for limited government, your idea of working together is to call people extremists. Well, there's a lot of extremists sitting in this audience today, sir. I guarantee that.
But this is what you think of our cities. This is what you think of our cities.
Please hold your applause, if you would, until the end. We appreciate it. We want to keep moving.
This is what he thinks of our cities, that there are bodies floating in the city of Newark. How insulting is that to the people of the city and others working together? This is insulting. That he would talk about Camden and say that my vision for what we should do in Camden is leveling the city. That's just unacceptable. We don't need a senator that's going to talk down to our New Jersey cities. We need senators who are going to lift up our whole state and make us understand that in New Jersey, there's no north-south, urban, suburban. We're one state with one destiny.
All right, let's go to Jonathan with a question about entitlement programs.
Mr. Booker, you've talked a lot about compromise, and there's long been discussion in Washington about a big budget deal that could solve some of this government by crisis. But obviously that would require both sides accepting some things that they don't like. Would you support raising the retirement age for Social Security or other changes to that program as part of a big deal on taxes and spending?
No, I appreciate you saying that because that's how we're going to solve these large problems. Now, I believe actually that on Social Security, something that my opponent literally has called the biggest threat to our democracy is Social Security. He calls it a Ponzi scheme, thinks we should privatize it, not fix it, not make it stronger, but privatize it and end it. I believe that there are rational fixes that we could do, and we need to do them now to protect it. Such as raising the Social Security cap on payroll for the richest amongst us, that they pay a little bit more, then we preserve the system for everyone. It's common sense solutions to this, but your question was, would I sit at a table and compromise and work together? The answer is absolutely yes. Take Senator Menendez, for example, who just compromised on a bill for immigration. 8 senators, they called them the Gang of 8, came together and didn't get everything they wanted either side, but they compromised. My opponent rejects that compromise, thinks that that was not a solution that we should have. And so we need to send people to Washington who are going to work together to solve our problems, not take extremist stances and say no compromise, no working together, we're going to shut down government.
But you talk about raising a tax to fund Social Security. Would you make changes, as Republicans have asked, some Republicans have asked, that would reduce the benefits, either by raising the retirement age, changing the way inflation is calculated? Would you reduce it if that was part of a compromise deal? You
know, if you talk to people, seniors all across our state who are relying on Social Security and ask them, should we be reducing their benefits? It's barely enough to bridge in a high-cost state like New Jersey. It's really hard for them to make way with the Social Security checks they're getting right now. So I don't favor reducing benefits. We need to make sure that we are doing things to strengthen Social Security. Common sense things around a table, Republicans and Democrats working together to make sure our senior citizens are not in poverty, but actually have security and have a way to make sure that they can enjoy the final years of their lives.
Mr. Lonegan, should we privatize Social Security? What's your view on that?
You know, I have a mother who is now 80 years old, who worked hard for 30 years after my dad died, paid into Medicare, paid into Social Security. She deserves those benefits. She earned those benefits. But Mayor Booker supports a plan under Barack Obama to cut $750 billion out of Medicare. Those seniors who have paid into that program all their lives, like my mom, have the right to those full benefits. But you're going to see a rationing of those benefits for senior citizens under Obamacare. Social Security needs to be reformed over the decades to come so that we don't have this constant problem with less and less people coming into a system and more retirees, and everybody knows that.
But your plan, like you said in the last debate on Social Security, his plan is to allow people that are young to actually go into the private market.
That's correct. My plan would allow personally held Social Security
What that would do would be to take the rug out from people paying into the system and endanger the whole system. If you
how would it work,
payers right now don't pay in, it endangers the whole system.
You know, if what Mayor Booker is saying is that you have these people on the top of the system collecting, but it relies on the people coming at the bottom to pay in to shore up the people at the top, what you're describing is a pyramid scheme. And we certainly don't think that's the case, do we?
No,
Social Security is not supposed to be a pyramid scheme. It doesn't rely on the people. All those people who bought in all their lives, they paid for their Social Security. You're telling me we're relying on those young people coming in to fund seniors?
I'm describing
because what you're describing, sir, is a pyramid scheme.
As it was designed by FDR and Republicans working together to design a system that could last. Common sense fixes are what we need, not telling people to go into the private market, let Wall Street decide your retirement fate. That does not work.
See, here's the difference
we really
between
believe we believe Democrats and Republicans, because you're on the extreme. Even Republicans are saying we can do common sense things like the moderator asked us, common sense things. That's where the negotiation should be, not in throwing out the system and throwing it to Wall Street.
I want young people to have the opportunity to either go into the current Social Security system, it needs to be maintained, or have that same money going into their own privately held investment fund that would be governed by the same rules. Imagine the money they would have in the bank by the time they're 65 years old. Imagine, folks, if you had all your money in the bank that you put into Social Security into your own accounts right now. That would make you wealthy.
All right.
Many people would be wealthy. But the difference between me and Cory Booker is he doesn't trust people to invest their own money. He doesn't want to give you the ability to invest your own money. He wants the government to do every single thing for you.
All right, let's move on to David with a question on immigration.
Yeah, Mr. Lonegan, this issue has reemerged during the campaign, so we want to give you a chance to clarify for viewers and voters. Back in 2007, there were reports in several newspapers that you hired 2 people who were in the United States illegally to put up lawn signs for your nonprofit organization, Americans for Prosperity. The Bergen Record reports that the workers said you picked them up in an area where workers were known to be. At the same time, your campaign website says you oppose proposals to give amnesty and eventually citizenship to as many as 11 million undocumented immigrants here. So, question being, are you only okay with illegal immigrants working in the country when you directly benefit?
I love biased reporting. Actually, I hired 2 men who I tried to hire. They never went to work with me. They never actually started work, who said they were legal. It turns out if you check your facts, one of them actually was. So you have to go by what somebody says. So I know that immigration is an important part of this country and that we will have immigrants coming to this country. We always have. My grandparents were Italian immigrants. They came here from Italy right through Ellis Island. The old-fashioned way, they had to have a sponsor, and they came here legally. We are not going to deport 11.5 million people. Everybody knows that. We need to, 1, secure our borders. We need to, number 2, deport illegal alien criminals. But my opponent, Cory Booker, has actually made Newark, New Jersey a sanctuary state for illegal alien criminals. You can go into Newark, you can commit vandalism, you can assault somebody, and you're going to be protected from ICE. So here's the message. If you're an illegal immigrant and you're a criminal, go to Newark. That might explain his rising crime rates.
You know,
Mr. Booker?
Again,
well, you have made it a sanctuary city.
Sir, that's not true. And first of all,
you haven't made it a
I want you to say right now, your words don't hurt me, but your policies hurt the people of New Jersey. Let's be very clear right now. Mr. Lonegan engages in lots of hypocrisy. He says he's against government so-called bailouts, things like Sandy Aid, but when his city was in trouble, when he drove the finances in the ditch, he ran for a bailout. He says he's against having undocumented workers get amnesty, but when he had a business and ran the business, he hired undocumented workers. And so this is the reality we have with Mr. Lonegan. He, and again, the Americans for Prosperity, that sounds really good, but prosperity, sir, he actually got paid $250,000 last year, almost, to run a campaign against raising the minimum wage. In other words, he made about $100 an hour to stop people in New Jersey from making $8.50. This kind of hypocrisy is not good policy. What we need to have is people working together to hammer out compromises to make us have an immigration system that still builds our country but also protects our borders.
All right, Mr. Booker, we want to get to...
$250,000. Who took that money?
Let's get to an issue about how you portray yourself in some of your public speeches. There have been reports, that one story that made headlines about a murder victim who supposedly died in your arms in Newark one night. There are reports that there's a police report that says you were on the scene assisting, but that the victim actually died in the arms of a woman who was on the front steps. So what really happened that night?
Thank you very much for asking the question. This is unfortunately another attack by my Tea Party friend and his campaign, saying that me arriving on the scene right after a person was shot, trying to address his injuries, trying to stop him from bleeding to death, and actually, unfortunately, he fell into cardiac arrest, as the police report says, which means his heart stopped.
He died at the hospital.
Well, he was officially declared dead at the hospital, but the police report says that he had cardiac arrest at the time, which means his heart stopped. But listen to what we're arguing over. This is the kind of distraction that we have from my Tea Party opponent, trying to say, well, did he have a cardiac arrest, or was it death, or this or that? The reality is we have too much violence in all of our inner cities in New Jersey. And what's the plan that we have to stop that violence? Here's another case of gun violence in my city where I tried desperately to save somebody's life, but unfortunately they died. A result, as we see in Newark, of so many weapons pouring from out of state into our state. You heard very clearly. I believe that these gun shows should have background checks. My opponent doesn't think you should have background checks to stop criminals from getting guns in the first place.
But this whole issue really goes to not about where he physically died, but about how you portray yourself in stories and speeches to the public as you go around the country, to your alma mater, to other places. There's another story about a character named T-Bone, who you've reportedly admitted was in fact a composite of people,
Sir,
a man who supposedly threatened
that's
your
not
life.
true.
So here's your chance to set the record straight, and also to tell us whether it gets to the core of whether you're embellishing stories to prop yourself up.
Absolutely. So again, we have police on the scene that corroborated everything I said in the first story. We actually have my former opponent, Sharp James's police director, who's not part of my team, that confirmed that there was indeed a T-bone, and this was a common name during the time that I was living in one of the most dangerous areas of our state. And again, these are the things that we see on the other side trying to distract from the truth. Was he in cardiac arrest? Was he dead? Was it what person named T-bone or what have you? The reality is this is just two stories from my life, which a person who lives in one of the more violent neighborhoods, chose to live in one of the more violent neighborhoods of my city, is experiencing every day. The problem is, with all of this, is that these kind of stories are all too common, with hundreds of people in our state, going from Camden to Patterson to Passaic, being victims of gun violence. And the key is what will we do as United States senators to help stop that violence? Background checks is one thing.
Mr. Lonegan, did you want to respond to this?
I've never brought up this young man, Wazen Miller, in my campaign. It was exposed by a major news publication, not related to me.
This is the gentleman who died.
The 19-year-old young man who apparently stumbled into the mayor's arms, which did not happen, did not stumble into his arms, did not die in his arms. And I find it deeply disturbing when an elected official uses the death of someone like that to parade around the country and build himself up. It's opportunism on a major scale, but it really shows a lack of judgment in many, many ways.
And the lack of judgment is someone talking about bodies floating in rivers in my city. A lack of judgment is condemning cities and exaggerating the violence as opposed to doing practical things that can support them. And the judgment we need down in Washington is judgment that agrees with 84% of gun owners, 90% of Americans, that say there's too much gun violence. We need to stop criminals from getting their hands on guns by putting in clearly needed background checks to stop terrorists and criminals from getting them at gun shows.
Let's go to Jonathan.
You know, it's really hard to exaggerate violence to the families of the 708 or so people shot under your watch as mayor.
But you're finding a way to do that, sir, in a way that's disrespectful to every city in our state.
All right, let's move to Jonathan with a question about role models in Washington.
For each candidate, starting with Mr. Lonegan, please name a sitting senator that you admire and tell us why.
I admire Mike Lee. I admire Ted Cruz. I admire Rand Paul. I admire Marco Rubio. I admire, well, a number of them, actually. Those who hold the line, those who get up and advocate for liberty, who are standing up against big government, very much the way the founding fathers did in this country. That's why I admire them, because they're not afraid to stand on principle. They're not afraid to stand up for our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and they'll take the hits from the media, from the opposition, and they stand tall. They just don't back off. That's why I admire them.
Mr. Booker?
Well, I admire a lot of senators on both sides of the aisle, in fact. People like the Gang of 8 senators who came together and hammered out a compromise. You see, there are actually people in both parties that are down in Washington right now trying to work to get things done. And lots of Republicans, President passed. From Jack Kemp, who did a fundraiser for me, was a congressman that supported me in my efforts, to people like Olympia Snowe and Dick Lugar. The challenge is if you look at the list of people he just named, they're all the far-right extremists of the Senate. They're the Tea Party people. And so if you want to send another Tea Party person who's responsible right now for shutting down our American government, if you want to send another extremist down to Washington who believes in playing roulette with our full faith and credit, then support him. You see who he admires. I admire people on both sides of the aisle throughout our history that are able to put aside their differences and find ways to work together to get the things done for the people of the United States of America. That's what we elect people do, not to stop government, not to shut government down, not to contribute to gridlock because of extremist views, but to come together and work together to do the work of the American people.
All right, gentlemen, we're almost out of time. So on this next question, just 30 seconds each, if you would, what is the biggest change that you, Mr. Lonegan, hope to make in the Senate?
Well, I'd like to introduce a bill that will sunset every regulatory body of regulation on a regular basis, re-examine them, roll them back, free up American enterprise, free up businesses to grow and prosper. We need to create real jobs through the private sector, not through massive corporate subsidies, government programs like the ones we see in Newark that cost taxpayers millions and millions and billions and result in a 14% unemployment rate.
Thank you. Mr. Booker?
So what he means is he wants to repeal the Clean Water and Clean Air Act, that he wants to repeal regulations that keep our food safe and clean. What I want to do, my biggest goal, is to go down to Washington and do things to create jobs, do the kind of things that America should be doing, investing in infrastructure so we can have great projects like the one in this region, like Patco. Extending that rail line actually helps to create businesses all along the light rail. We need to invest in higher education. We need to make higher education more affordable for more students, because in a knowledge-based economy, the greatest thing we can do to be competitive tomorrow is to help young people today.
You know, investment is a code word for higher taxes. Mayor, we don't need the government to create jobs. We need our freedom. Give us our freedom, and the people of this country will create all the jobs we need.
Hey, I would love it if you would give freedom to women. I would love it. I would love it if you would give freedom to women to make their own health care decisions. Instead of saying I want to close Planned Parenthood and I want to make abortion illegal, even in the cases of rape and incest. You see, you can't have it both ways. If you want liberty, give it to gay Americans to be able to have the same treatment under the law. If you want liberty, give it to women to make their own health care decisions.
I'm going to stop both of you.
I need to respond to, he's attacked me.
We're going to give you time for your closing statements.
No, that's not, he's attacked me on this abortion issue because I'm pro-life, but this man supports taxpayer-funded abortions up to the day of delivery. I want to know one thing. What abortion would you ban? Under what circumstances would you ban abortion?
I'm very happy.
told you how to fill out the questionnaire so you get their endorsement. Well, tell the people what abortions you would ban.
So I will tell the American people and the people of the state of New Jersey exactly what I will stand for. I believe in Roe versus Wade. It was decided by our Supreme Court, and I will stand by defending it from people like him that want to repeal Roe v. Wade. If a woman is a victim of rape or incest, he thinks that abortion should be illegal. And what I'm saying to you is, if you believe in liberty, then give liberty back to women and let them make their own health care decisions.
As a follow-up
and
to that,
fund things like Planned Parenthood that help us detect problems before they become a real reality.
I'd say the follow-up to that is the mayor is scared to death of NARAL and the far-left pro-abortion lobby, because he will not answer the question. He supports abortions funded by taxpayers or whatever up to the day of delivery for any reason whatsoever. He took safe, legal, and rare out of the Democrat platform. You can see it on Cory Roberts' show right on my website at Lonegan.com.
Roberts show, sir.
You can see it.
I'm here right now, and I will tell you.
Will ban,
I will tell you.
None.
I will tell you right now. I believe a woman's health care decisions should be between her and her doctor, and we should defend Roe versus Wade against people that want to get rid of Roe versus Wade and make criminal abortions, even in the case of rape and incest. That's where I stand. I'm telling you right now. You don't need to go to Cory Roberts. You heard it right here, right now.
Imagine aborting a baby in the 8th month of pregnancy. He supports that.
That's not true. That is not true, and that's unfortunate that you were trying to actually distract people.
That's not true. So you support partial birth abortion ban?
Sir, again, our views on this are very distinct and very clear.
No, mine is clear.
Exactly. You want to make abortion illegal in the cases of rape and incest. I want to protect Roe v. Wade.
I'm pro-life. I love the sanctity of life. I think it's the most beautiful thing God gives us. You'll abort a baby in its 8th month of delivery.
All right, gentlemen, we are out of time. Okay. And we don't have time for closing statements because we did get onto that topic of abortion, which is fine. It's fine. We want to thank you for this lively debate and for taking part tonight. We want to thank our panelists, David Ushery and Jonathan Tamari, for taking part as well with some great questions. And thanks to Rowan University for hosting us tonight. This conversation continues now on NBC10.com and on Cozy TV. Don't forget to vote 1 week from today. I'm Jim Rosenfield. Thanks for being here.
Jim, thank you.